The ovarian cancer opportunity, I think, will have significant financial returns. The one on the right, I don't think it can return any capital at all. And so the question is, what happens to the one on the right? I think it's going to be lost. And I think it's going to be lost because there is no system set up to save that intellectual property. And it's not just one. I've seen dozens of these.
There's a TB epidemic coming. It will affect the entire world. Billions and billions of dollars are waiting to be earned.
Big pharmaceuticals are right up there with the arms dealers.
Payoffs, cover-ups, unmarked graves.
Are you crazy? These people, they kill anybody.
The poor man seems to have convinced himself there was a conspiracy in which you're all complicit.
There's a contract out on it. You'll never know who ordered the hit. That's the way it works with corporate murder.
Some very nasty things live under rocks, especially in foreign gardens.
I bet that wasn't how you were thinking this particular talk was going to start out. And maybe it was a mistake because now I have to compete with pregnant Rachel Wise, and she's getting killed, and it's very dramatic. And my talk is not really as dramatic. But even though I don't have the pathos of a murdered pregnant woman, I think maybe the subject matter today can compete a little bit with that start, because it's really a serious one, and it affects all of us. It affects our human health. It affects our capacity to deal with climate change and our challenges in the environment. And our question is why certain science gets stuck in the lab, even if it should have a positive impact on human health or the environment. By the way, please feel free to ask any questions, even in the middle of my talk. If it gets to be too much, then I will shut it off. But otherwise, please feel free to do so. I will tell you, though, that the way the lights are going, it's very difficult to actually see anybody in the audience. You might have to stand up and really wave. So your first question might be, what did that movie trailer have to do with anything? It turns out that David Cornwell, who was writing as John le Carre, and I were inspired by the same thing. It set the course of his book, and it set the course of my life. And that is the question of the moment, the often Byzantine, convoluted, and frequently unsuccessful way that technology transfer from labs happens, or doesn't. I'm going to start with the two cases that inspired me, the first of which also inspired The Constant Gardener, the movie trailer that you just saw. Then we'll talk about what is supposed to happen, what barriers in place, and how you can possibly help to overcome them. Back to our movie. John le Carre needed a thriller of a plotline, so he focused his book on a specific real-life case, a case in Africa based on the development and the path to market of an antibiotic to treat meningitis, how it was tested and how it was headed to the market. But he was inspired by and did a lot of his background research on a different example, chelating agents for thalassemia. Thalassemia is an inherited blood disorder caused when the body fails to make enough hemoglobin. You need hemoglobin to transport oxygen to your cells and take carbon dioxide from your tissues. Untreated, thalassemia patients die very painful deaths, usually at a few years old. We're talking about very stunted children who likely have broken pretty much every bone in their body before they die. To prevent this, they can be given massive doses of blood transfusions. But until the advent of chelating agents, that could cause a massive iron overload and would cause a massive iron load in these patients. So they would, in the words of Dr. David Nathan at Children's Hospital Boston, who treated a lot of these patients, die, and I quote, an agonizing, slow death from progressive heart failure due to iron overload. Once you started treating a child with the blood transfusions, they had about 10 years to live. They were usually treated, by the time they hit 7 or 8 years old, that was the limit. When I was in college, I met and I became friendly with several thalassemics at Children's Hospital Boston. They were my age. Their time was about up. They knew they were dying. They also knew that there was a chelating agent on the shelf, and they couldn't get it. Imagine that with me for a moment. Imagine that you are dying, or that your child is dying, and there is a drug that could save them, that exists, but you can't get it. That happens a lot to people suffering from a wide and sad variety of diseases. Some parts of the process are slow to protect the patient. The Constant Gardener actually touches on this. And others are just plain infuriating. When I saw how crazy the process was, here a writer of spy novels says his stories are tame compared to the processes in this drug development and the reality. I couldn't stand it. And I wondered if one day I could try to understand it and do something. And then I realized that medical technology transfer may actually have some of the best processes. These thrilling academic papers are about intercropping on rubber tree plantations. Intercropping is just planting more than one kind of plant in a plot instead of a monoculture. Unfortunately, I could find no movie trailer about this. But the paper on the right is showing that intercropping is effective. It improves productivity, it lowers pesticide use. The paper on the left is a study showing that farmers don't really adopt it. Both are valid papers representing really good research. But papers similar to these on these same topics have been written for decades. At the time I was meeting the thalassemics, when I was young and naive and unafraid, I was studying environmental policy. And the idea of intercropping rattan and taman, 2 other crops, on rubber tree plantations was all the rage. I mean, a plant sciences kind of level of rage, but the rage for plant sciences. I bought into the excitement. And then I met a man who controlled a large portion of the world's rubber plantations. And being young and naive and unafraid, I asked him how the intercropping was going. You know where this is going, right? He had never heard of it. But he said that he would ask some of his foremen, and he actually got back to me. Nope, crickets. So clearly something was wrong. The academics were all talking to each other, but the science was staying where it was. Now, intercropping is a particularly difficult case because nobody really gains much economic benefit. There's no intellectual property to capitalize on in intercropping, except maybe a government or hopefully the farmers that use it. But there I was, worrying, trying to figure this thing out. So I started studying why do some important inventions get stuck in the lab. I went back to school for an interdepartmental MBA, PhD in plant sciences and molecular biology and the management of technological innovation. And then, when I was about up to writing my dissertation on the process of technology commercialization, I realized that I didn't have anything important to add. I didn't have much intelligence or perspective, and I certainly felt that I was no smarter than the others who had been trying to write about it before me. So I thought I would do some tech transfer. And I starting companies out of science labs. I really just started starting companies to get data for my doctoral dissertation. The earliest companies all fit within my data set. I was really lucky. I met a wonderful business partner who's still my partner after 25 years, who had an MBA, PhD in ocean engineering and had come out of the Peace Corps and was interested in similar issues. As we got more experience, we decided that we would focus on starting companies that would have a positive impact on human health or the environment. And that we would also reach out to the different licensing offices, and we'll talk about licensing offices in a minute, to ask them to send us technologies that they thought were really important, not intercropping, but some that had real intellectual property and that were really important, that they thought were stuck in the lab for one way or the other, for one reason or another. And we thought we could put in enough management time and expertise that we could help bring them out of the lab. After 11 companies, we decided we wanted more leverage and more impact. And as a female CEO, COO team, we decided we also had some other things we wanted to prove. So we decided to start a fund to fund transformative science companies that meet pressing societal needs and to show that impact and returns can go hand in hand. And now I have at least some perspective to bring on the problem to you, but I never did write the dissertation. This is how it's supposed to work, at least in the US. Academic scientists make discoveries. According to the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980, academic institutions own the discoveries of the scientists that work at them. Faculty members sign contracts to this effect. And there's a division of the proceeds if an invention actually makes it out of the lab. Usually it's 1/3 to the inventor, 1/3 to their lab or their department, and 1/3 to the university itself. This was meant to prevent inventions from suffering the same fate and the same challenge I talked about with intercropping, that there may be no clear profit motive to commercialize something if there's no intellectual property ownership and no clear path involved there. At the university, there is generally, one hopes, a tech transfer office. And this office is usually charged with patenting any discoveries made and then either licensing it out to an existing business or spinning up a company around it. Or else it just sits there. In 2018, the Association of University Technology Managers, which is the trade organization for these licensing offices, reported that there was $71.7 billion in research funding for the universities. A bit over 17,000 patent applications were filed. 7,625 were issued. 1,080 startups were formed, though most of them ultimately have already failed. 828 new products were launched from the university tech transfers. And yet more than 80% of the licensing offices lost money. With the exception of a few outliers, the expected value of operating a university technology transfer office, at least on a monetary level, is zero. Actually, it's a little less than zero, but once you add in a few licenses, it pops it up a little bit. They often have little or no money to file patents. Most people don't realize that. It turns out that more than 95% of foreign rights are never protected. Less than 30% of provisional patent applications are ever become full patents. And there are many research universities, even major engineering research universities, that have no budget for patent filings unless there's an outside sponsor for that patent. On top of that, many of them, honestly, and I know this for better or for worse because I've worked with a lot of them, are just not that helpful or competent. I don't want to dwell on that right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions after the talk. But let's say the invention has the support of the licensing office. About 37% of granted patents from the USPTO, from the top 58 universities for technology licensing, are involved in some kind of monetization, if they come from one of these top 58 universities. Of them, almost 30% are licensed out to a bigger company, and 1.3% are transferred to startups. It obviously varies a lot from university to university. Now, the larger companies are a bit of a black box. For this talk, let's just talk about the startups. The new company needs to build a plan and attract capital. This process sometimes works really well, and sometimes it doesn't. Lots of academic research has been going on in the field to study it, even though I didn't do any of it, by people who actually did write their dissertations. And here's a distillation of what they found. Issues with commercialization infrastructure, campus culture, bandwidth constraints, lack of access to capital. There are commercialization policies at the university that actually inhibit the process of tech transfer. The faculty doesn't know what they're doing. There's not enough research funding. They can't recruit talent to help with the startups, et cetera. The truth is, there is no one right answer for why science gets stuck in the lab. I have no revelatory mic drop moment. I can't tell you, it's 42. But I can tell you, based on my experience, some of the things I think are at play. First, I'm going to take a moment to tell you how venture capital funds, which are supposed to be key players in the system, make their money. How I make my money right now. Partners get investors to invest money in a central fund or funds. The investors pay the fund managers a small fee, sometimes, unfortunately, a large one, which I don't think is actually very healthy for the system. And a portion of the profits, usually about 20% of the fund's profits, go back to those partners who are investing the funds. The funds usually aim for about a 3 to 4x return on their capital, but some companies will fail. So they need to at least aim for a higher return than that on each investment. The fund's partners are supposed to know how to help the companies grow and work hard with the founders to help this happen. One challenge for our question on why science gets stuck in the lab is that while technology licensing offices are, as we just explained, a losing proposition economically, well, at least monetarily, venture capital firms have been pretty successful from a profit standpoint. And while they, of course, don't make all of that money through tech transfer, that was a key aspect of the original venture capital funds. The first venture capital fund was started in 1947 by Carl Compton, the president of MIT, American Research and Development Corporation. And he funded that with a Harvard Business School professor, George Dorio, and the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, Ralph Flanders. And the idea was that they were going to invest in technologies that were developed during World War II, and they were going to invest in the technologies coming out of MIT and Harvard. Now, many of the venture capital funds have grown so big that they need to deploy too much capital to invest in these small spin-out companies. You can imagine if you have $1 billion fund, you can't just put out $1 or $2 million into that many companies. It would be impossible to manage. I do think that this is starting to even itself out in the ecosystem, and smaller funds are starting to form. But it is a challenge for tech transfer. And if you talk to those poor beleaguered TLOs, the technology transfer officers, they will say that this has become a big problem for them. I'll add that the lifetime of a fund is typically 10 years. So investors want to exit from their investments before that. And not all technologies, especially not all really important technologies, can really come out of the lab and hit that inflection point where somebody wants to buy them or they're going to IPO within 10 years. Now, I run an impact fund. We invest for the highest possible return, though, at the same time. And while we're a women-led fund and all of our investments meet UN Sustainable Development Goals, that is really important to us on a values basis. My investors expect me to make a lot of money for them. That's what I'm supposed to do. There are some things that I would dearly like to fund that I can't because I'm fundamentally a steward of my investors' capital. So let's talk about what happens with, again, our dear technology transfer. Constraints of the profit motive are one of the top reasons that great science, important science, gets stuck. Both of these companies are working on important cancer diagnostics. I've seen the presentations for both of these companies. My fund looks at over 10,000 companies a year, and we invest in maybe 10 of them. I funded the one on the left. It should be the first diagnostic for ovarian cancer, early stage diagnostic, and I am so excited about it. I could talk to you about this thing all day. Right now, we diagnose ovarian cancer usually at stage 3 or stage 4, and it's basically a death sentence. If we hit it at stage 3, if you're lucky, there's a 40% survival rate. And at stage 4, again, if you're lucky, it's a 20% survival rate, but you would have to be very lucky. If we can get it at stage 1, 94% survival rate. These guys can test it at stage 1. Simple blood test, easy for anyone to access. It's going to be very inexpensive to do. The one on the right is also a really deadly form of cancer, and I really wish I could fund it. It has the same kind of stage 1 to stage 4 survival versus death rates. So if we could fund the early diagnostic, we could save a whole bunch of people. But I can't fund it. Take a look at this with me. Ovarian cancer has over 20,000 new cases annually. One on the right, the rare genetic mutation of a tumor type has fewer than 1,000. Clinical trials require patients to actually come into the trial and to come in within a certain period of time, hopefully. There are lots of people who have the symptoms of ovarian cancer. They're very nonspecific, right? And all the women in the audience are nodding. But the one on the right is going to have a really slow recruiting process. There are just fewer patients. On the other hand, the cost to get each one of these through to development is about the same. The ovarian cancer opportunity, I think, will have significant financial returns. The one on the right, I don't think it can return any capital at all. And so the question is, what happens to the one on the right? I think it's going to be lost. And I think it's going to be lost because there is no system set up to save that intellectual property. And it's not just one. I've seen dozens of these. When I talk to big funders like large corporations that actually do the testing, or the American Cancer Society has a fund, everybody knows this, but nobody's figured out what to do about it. Wouldn't it be great if you could have one blood test that would test you for hundreds of cancers and you would know? Yeah, you can't make a standalone company that just tests for this one rare kind of cancer, but you could roll them up into one test, and that could be viable. But I can't find anybody to do it. So I'm going to challenge all of you to, I want to hear about it. This is some, sorry? Gallery? Yeah, it's not working for these liquid biopsies. I hope one day it will, right? And part of it is, it's a moment for these particular kinds of companies. We finally have the technology to make them work. They're all coming out of great research labs. The challenge is that you can also only sustain so many royalty streams within a given company and a given test. I think that we should be able, NIH funds all of this. They should be able to track it. Maybe we can apply some excellent AI and computer vision database technology to track them well enough that you could say, this one just died, let's grab it. And the universities hopefully wouldn't create that same kind of impossible royalty stack. It's a good question, but I think this is something that we can change. And it isn't just a problem in the startup realm, actually. Publicly held biotech firms right now have phase 1 and phase 2 clinical data. That means that they've established the safety and some of the efficacy has been tested for really important technologies, but they aren't bringing them to phase 3. They aren't getting to the market. And actually, as I was working on this talk, just last night, a friend was lamenting to me on WhatsApp that there are thousands of children withering and dying from rare diseases because of this problem. Moving on. There we go.
When I give the word, throw the first switch.
You've got it, Master.
Get ready. Get set. Go! Throw the second switch. Throw the third switch.
Not the third switch.
Throw it, I say! Throw it! Lies! Lies, do you hear me? Give my creation lies!
Okay, that's enough. Thank you so much. Well, I guess we're going to watch the whole thing. It's all good.
Turn everything off and bring me down!
I just love that clip, right? I need the light from the slide. So that, for me, is an example of the classic founder problem, which I think a lot of you are familiar with. Seriously, this is another top reason why technology gets stuck in the lab. My fund works with lots of neurodiverse scientists, but not everybody is willing to do that. And actually, one of our interns laughed a while ago, I guess it was last summer. We were listening to a ridiculous pitch. The pitch involved, at some point in the process, me saying, but doesn't that violate the second law of thermodynamics? And the person doing the pitching saying, yes, but. And that happens. I think, my Maureen, the partner for 25 years, and I were listening to these pitches, and we just get so excited. We're listening to a perpetual motion machine. And the younger people on the team are saying, why are they smiling? And the answer is because we've been waiting for that for 20 years. We'd heard worse than that. But now there it was, finally, the perpetual motion machine that we were waiting for. So I think one of the key challenges is that a vanishingly small percentage of scientists are really meant to be CEOs. And very few of them actually want to be. Yet in the system that I described before, either the scientist or the university licensing office or someone else at the university, which, while things have been changing, were never designed to be particularly entrepreneurial, has to push that technology out of the lab. Or a company needs to find it, which means it has to be marketed, something your average, say, molecular biologist is not really trained to do. it's not even on a societal basis a good idea to have them do that, right? But that's how our system works. We have this challenge and this waste. This is another area that needs change. You can see a lot happening with accelerators and with government programs and mentoring programs like MIT's Venture Mentoring Service, which has expanded to multiple universities. Stanford has all kinds of programs. You can help with this. If you have specialized knowledge, you can help with this. Is there a cause that you care about that needs innovation? Do you live anywhere besides the Bay Area where the universities are already crawling with would-be entrepreneurs and advisors and venture capitalists, and they really do not necessarily want to see you? Or are you willing to put in enough time and energy that you can help change the economics of transferring one of these important technologies out of the lab so that it is viable, so that it does get funded, or it does get noticed by the industry that could actually use it? You can do this. Get in there. If this is you and you're interested and you don't know how to get started, come and talk to me during the conference and I will brainstorm with you how you might do this. Because this is really important. Withering children are counting on you. I mean, I don't want to be dramatic, but you can do this. And this challenge, the founder problem, which also includes whether a founder is willing to find good help and work alongside them to make a company successful, and scientists not just not knowing what to do or where to begin, is one of the biggest, best studied, and best known challenges. I happen to be writing a book on it with several co-authors, and I'm happy to talk about that later with you too. Here's another challenge that we can really make a dent in: access. Not all founders seem to be created equal. In the venture capital industry, about 2.8% of funding goes to women CEOs, another 5.8% go to people of color. That number goes up and down depending on how you define that. I lived this, and I still live this. When I was an entrepreneur, the first company I started that required venture capital had the original mesh networking patents associated with it. The co-founder was a man named Robert Poor. He had a lot of experience. He'd been in Silicon Valley for 25 years with Steve Jobs at Apple and Next, and George Lucas at the division of Lucasfilms that became Pixar. He had gone back to MIT because he had this idea for mesh networking patents. The Zigbee standard came out of that work. And I said to him when he said he wanted me to help start the company with him, Rob, I don't know how to do this. And I'm going to make it so much harder. We still know, years later, decades later, that it's harder to get a company started and funded if you have a female CEO. Rob knew that, but Rob was determined. He wanted to make another bankable female CEO. I think that at base was one reason why he chose me. It's not what he's going to tell you if you ask him. But I pitched 1,000 times, probably more than 2,000 times. When we were starting companies, I raised tens of millions of dollars for the businesses that we started. And I never once pitched a woman in any decision-making capacity ever. So when we decided that we were starting a fund, we have an underlying thesis that we were going to level the playing field. We didn't need to actually give a preference to any of the women or minority or underrepresented founders. We just needed to give them a fair shot. And I will tell you that what has happened is we have about, at any given time, between a third and 45% women CEOs, another third people of color. Between 80 and 90% of our founding teams have a diverse founder. And the funds are performing extremely well. So that's their performance. They did that. They trade, I'm afraid, at about a 20 to 25% discount compared to their peers who are either white men or athletic African-American males. But they rock the house. I'll tell you, this is not easy. And this still happens to me now. I debated whether to put this up or not. But this was at the bottom of an email, and they accidentally included me on the email stream. So the question was, from one person to another in South Carolina, which is where I live, do they think I would be a good speaker, sort of a halfway decent speaker, right? And did they know me? Could they introduce me? And if you can't read it, I see some people squinting. This is what he wrote. I've never heard her speak, but I think she'd probably be a good speaker. Even though they're mostly women investors, they're supposed to have a pretty good return. Just be careful. She and a partner pitched me, and they are all proud of their whole diversity thing. Their fund is seriously mostly chicks, blacks, Arabs, and Indian chiefs. It's like the land of misfit toys. Then again, what guy would want to be funded by women? So I guess that's not really their fault, and they get what they get, and they do pretty well with it. Happy to make the introduction. Let's go back. I don't like to look at that. That's just ugliness. But it's not easy. It's still happening. You know, I thought about that reply, and I called a dear friend, Winston Henderson, who happens to be an African American man. It's very thoughtful and well spoken, and thought about what should I write, and should I reference it, and what I decided to do was just say. So the person in question, we had pitched for our first fund. And the first fund is doing really, really well. And so what I wrote is, I'm happy to talk for you. We do have a lot of diverse founders. Fund One's metrics are looking really good. For example, our first investment has gone from a pre-money valuation of a 20% discount on a $25 million cap note. So we invested it when the company was worth about $20 million. And now it's worth over $1 billion. Happy to talk to you about that return. So, there was a little bit of rancor in my reply, but not that much. I just wanted to be factual. But it's not easy. And we actually, the way we designed ourselves is we have a whole super early fund that invests in pre-seed and seed stage companies. It can really work at the very earliest level. It's a small fund that feeds the bigger fund. It doesn't even have a stated return target. But the point is that if you invest later, well, those founders and their technologies were likely to already have been lost, right? They never even made it into the pipeline. So we needed to do that. And like I said, they're outperforming. It's also aimed at solving or trying to help solve that problem of the scientist who has a great invention but really does not have any business experience and never should be charged with starting the company. So that scientific founders problem that I just talked about. I'm looking at you. Does anybody have any more questions or something they want to say before I go on? Okay. So let me go to something a lot less controversial. This is a classic conundrum. And actually, I had a meeting here this morning, and a person from investor here in Santa Fe said that they have a problem like this with the company that they're working on. It's a lack of upfront funding for manufacturing capacity. And it leads to a game of chicken. Funders want customer commitments before they'll outlay large amounts of capital. And customers, and you can understand this, want to actually know that their product is going to be delivered before they'll make a full commitment. The lack of upfront funding for manufacturing capacity can kill lots of really interesting technology. And in the green tech space, in the climate tech space, since a lot of times capital expenditure is required, it's a big problem. It's very tough to get over. The entrepreneur Keenan Sahin, who I love, saw this problem in cathodes with batteries. and spent $100 million of his own money to solve the cathode problem that was stopping the development, in his mind, but he was on it, of electric vehicle batteries. He said to me that he did it for his grandchildren. He told the New York Times, "It bothers me that so many wonderful inventions are stagnating." And he believes that there's a deep innovation crisis in the United States. He's an evangelist for the idea that new companies should innovate and then partner with manufacturing capacity so that we can get over this CapEx problem. Our system is not designed for this. But this is another thing that we can probably solve. If we tweaked our policy, probably even just our tax policy, so that there's monetary incentives for the manufacturing companies to partner with the smaller companies, I think we could do so. I've got 3 minutes. I'm looking at Jason. He's thinking, oh, no. All right, so I'll be fast. Overexuberance can also kill companies. The last cycle was dire for lots of these technologies, with investors who really didn't know what they were doing and how to help these companies to grow investing in them. I told you that most funds have a life cycle of 10 years. If you invest in the technology too early, they're going to run out of time before they're actually ready to hit the market. And I've seen that one again and again and again. I'm going to end on a positive note. And then if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. This is from the CDC website. This is what will happen now if you Google thalassemia, the problem that I started with. Thalassemia is a treatable disorder that can be well managed with blood transfusions and chelation therapy. So it worked in the end. Thanks so much.